Fallout 76 is about to get a massive new update, what is likely to be the biggest update to the game outside of the Wastelanders update itself. Steel Rain is coming. Right now we know the release date is at some point in July, but despite that, basically the whole thing just went live for testing on Fallout 76's public test server. So I've been able to play through the entirety of the Steel Rain story, try out all the new features and systems, and really give you guys an overview of what you can expect, but also some of the fairly glaring issues that are coming with this update and will hopefully be changed as it provides some of my first impressions or feedback. In this video, when talking about some of the story content, there'll be no spoilers given for the new questline. It's just going to be a rough overview and my first impressions of it, as of course, some of this stuff is subject to change, which on that note, this update is still about 2 months out from now. So in particular, when I go over some of the critiques or criticisms that come with legendary crafting or even legendary power armor / rebalance, it's important to note that this stuff is subject to change. Bethesda in the past has definitely taken features that weren't super great on release and reworked them in a fairly major way, like with legendary perks. And since we have so long before this update's even set to debut, that definitely seems pretty likely this time around. With that said, if you want to skip around or check out one feature or another, I'd have timestamps down below. This is definitely going to be a longer video. But with that said, let's first take a look at Steel Rain, the continuation of the Brotherhood of Steel story in Fallout 76. And as I mentioned before, I will not be giving story spoilers during this. I'm filming this video assuming most of you haven't played this yet and are planning to play it down the road, so I'm not going to ruin anything for you. This story is going to pick up immediately after the events of Steel Dawn. If you haven't played Steel Dawn yet, it was actually probably a good idea to wait, because I think this, as one cohesive story, will be pretty enjoyable. And although there technically is a part 1 and part 2 here, I think for a lot of people, if you play it the first time, you may not even really realize when that break was, as it is again a quite seamless transition from one to the next. One of the big questions I had going into this part 2 was the length of the story. Steel Dawn was about 3 hours or so of new content. You could really stretch that out until 4 hours if you were trying to. And I would say this subsequent Steel Rain questline is about a similar 3 hours, or at least for me it took about 3 hours. And to be clear with this one, I was playing it on my higher level character so I could fast travel everywhere. I basically had no issues with most enemies the vast majority of the time, although not always. There was actually one part where all I had was a bow and arrow and a crossbow, and I was having major hit detection issues, so it took me a really long time to take down a certain enemy. I would show you that footage in the background, but the enemy I was fighting is actually a bit of a spoiler, so I'm not going to show that here. And during my 3 hours with this, I was definitely not rushing. A lot of times I was going through almost all of the dialogue choices. I didn't do this at every interaction, but for the vast majority of them, I was spending a lot of time talking. So for me, 3 hours for part 1, 3 hours for part 2 is a kind of fair assumption. I think you could definitely stretch out Steel Rain to be a bit longer if you really take your time with some of these places. And again, if you are a lower level, if you can't fast travel everywhere, or if you have to actually take your time with taking down some of the enemies, this can feel quite a bit longer. Although with that said, I actually like the story design of Steel Rain quite a bit more. Some of the quests just felt longer than they were in Steel Dawn. In Steel Dawn, there were slightly less quests overall, but they took longer. You were kind of going down a longer path, and I really enjoyed that. I think the design was a lot better this time around. And one of the other things really cool about this DLC is it does really tie in together nicely with the first part. Even though there's going to be an 8-month gap in between part 1 and 2, one of the things I was surprised by and actually really liked was several of the characters, even some of those minor characters, or what seemed like minor characters, come back in a big way with part 2. And in fact, even some of the people not in part 1, but actually from other DLCs. We see Blue Ridge get a bit more involved with this one, and even a character from one of the 2019 DLCs makes a return with this one. And even some new characters. This isn't really a spoiler. One of the bad guys you're going to be interacting with are known as the Hellcat Mercenaries. They don't exactly have a ton of story to them, but they're kind of the generic bad guy humans you're going to be fighting during this. But overall, as far as the design of this one, it's a very true to form part 2. And what I mean by that is it's a continuation of the story, but doesn't really do much different. You go to a few new locations, you take down some enemies, you talk to some NPCs, there's some terminals and notes to read. Vault 96 is finally introduced into the game. This has literally been here since day 1 of Fallout 76, and now it does have a quest associated with it and an awesome interior. The interior is slightly edited from what was data mined, or you could kind of glitch into in the past. But like Steel Dawn, it's not as comprehensive as Wastelanders. It just adds in a couple of new locations and a few new basements on existing ones. They're trying to repurpose or make use of what is becoming a very full Appalachia. And overall with Steel Rain, it basically basically is just as linear as with Steel Dawn. There are choices to be made, and even in this one, since it is the conclusion, there are some larger choices to be made, but they don't really change anything. Like, you could have a big decision that will lead to somebody living or somebody dying, but it was kind of the end of those people's story anyway. It's not like this will block you off from accessing another quest or have a huge impact outside of some slightly different dialogue. Even the big choice you can make in Steel Dawn with choosing Romani or Shin just really leads to new dialogue in part 2. The story itself will kind of follow the exact same route, it's just the remarks they'll make around you will be slightly different depending on what choice you made. And at the end of the day, you are forced to join the Brotherhood of Steel with the Brotherhood of Steel DLC. There's no workaround here, there's no way to get out of that. Even if you hate them, you have to join them to play the new content. One thing that did stand out to me that was pretty interesting is it felt like there was less skill checks overall, but there was a skill check for doing a certain event, which was a bit more unique and interesting. And overall, my first impressions on this one are, it was really just okay. It's not bad. It's more free Fallout story content from Bethesda. This whole story as a 6-hour experience will definitely be pretty fun for a lot of you, and especially if you already own Fallout 76, it is definitely worth reinstalling for, in addition to some of the other features that have been added over the past couple of months. But to me, at least after playing it really felt more like a side quest than a main story quest overall. There's no major changes to Appalachia with this one. I was hoping they'd do something unique or interesting with the unique time frame of Fallout 76, that being the fact that it is just now 27 years after the bombs dropped, but in reality they don't explore that too much. And honestly, this story overall is just a familiar Fallout story, and again, to me it felt more like a side quest than a big main story experience. But it was still fun, it's not like it's bad, but if you played the rest of Fallout 76 and we were hoping Steel Rain would take things to the next level, I would definitely say that is not what happens here. As far as the fate of the Brotherhood of Steel, they definitely leave it in a way where we could see more content from them. As we'll talk about later in this video, it seems like a new event is coming around the faction, but also it does have a definitive end, so this could easily be the finale of the Brotherhood of Steel story content, and perhaps in the next DLC we loosely interact with them, kind of like how in this one you loosely interact with the Raiders and Settlers, but they don't play a major role. There are a couple of new items added in with this, one of the big ones being, after you complete the story, the Hellcat power armor, this being around those Hellcat mercenaries you are fighting. It's kind of weird in that at the end of the story, you don't really do anything that would signify getting this power armor, just as deposited into your inventory after you complete the final quest, even though you didn't like steal it from anyone. It's not like you fought some big baddie that was wearing the power armor and you stole it from them. It was rather random, but it is easily the best power armor in the game, as it has a unique effect of giving 2% reduced damage from ballistic attacks. Ballistic weapons being ones that fire bullets in Fallout 76, the most common, the vast majority of enemies use this type of weapon, and if you're wearing a full set of Hellcat power armor, that means you are getting 12% less ballistic damage, which is actually massive. That's a 12% cut to any bullets that hit you. This, when used in tandem with the attribute of power armor, where it gives you 42% damage reduction for a full set, can mean you are functionally almost like a walking tank when fighting enemies shooting you with guns. The only funny part was, in the PTS, the actual power armor itself wasn't added yet, so we don't know what it looks like. It just currently uses the model of one of the old power armors with the stats of the new one. So if it looks really ugly, maybe people won't use it because they don't care. But if it looks really cool, you can expect everyone to be repping this one because, again, it is the best power armor stat-wise. And there's also this new daily ops weapon with the Facebreaker, a unique power fist if you're interested in that. Although, outside of the new story and questline, one of the more surprising additions we actually got with this one is Minerva. This is going to be a new rotating vendor that will pop up in Appalachia from Monday to Wednesday. And basically, the way it'll work is on Monday at what seems like to be noon Eastern time, at least on the public test server, Minerva will show up at either Foundation, Atlas, or Crater. It'll be one of the three. And there's no map marker or anything, just when you fast travel to one of these locations, you will find her with a little camp there. There's a couple of new NPCs with some dialogue. I'll let you guys experience these for yourself the first time because they can be pretty funny. But the key aspect around Minerva is she is a brand new gold bullion vendor, and she has a rotating list of items for sale, so it'll always be changing. But whatever gold bullion item she happens to be carrying that week will have a flat 25% discount. So these being all the items that the other gold bullion vendors do have, except she will have them for cheaper. And again, not all of them. She has a limited but rotating list. But even further, she actually sells some of the daily ops rewards for gold bullion. So some of the things in game right now that you typically can only win from daily ops, which is just RNG based, you can actually directly buy if you save up enough gold gold bullion. These aren't at a discount or anything, and they're a bit pricier, but you do have a guaranteed method of getting them. And overall, I think this is actually a really cool and nice addition. There's no real grind associated with this. It is just using some of the old grinds, or actually in a way removing some grind and making things cheaper as an alternate avenue to buying the same things. And to me, it was just a nice little surprise. I'm definitely happy to see this get added. But then we have legendary crafting, which is definitely one of the more controversial aspects of this update overall, but also has the potential to be one of the most interesting added features to the game. As for context, if you aren't an active player of Fallout 76, when you get to the end game, one of the most popular things to do is farm or grind for legendary items. The higher tier economy is basically all based around having a god tier legendary. So when they add legendary crafting, a lot of people get very interested in what exactly this will entail. And I think to preface this one, we should establish how Bethesda actually has been describing this, both in the actual article that kicked off the PTS and the Inside the Vault, where they say you can turn normal items into legendary items, re-roll your existing legendary items attributes, and even upgrade or downgrade their star rating. So a lot of people, including myself, got really excited that this would be a couple of new systems all interacting together, but kind of giving you different options as to what you wanted to do with a legendary. In reality, this is actually super simple. So you head over to a workbench, and at the cost of legendary modules and these newly added legendary cores, and these legendary cores come in 1-star, 2-star, and 3-star varieties. You need the appropriate star number to craft the star number on a legendary. So if you have the right modules, if you have the right core, you can craft a legendary item. And it's pretty simple. Basically just go into the corresponding workbench, whether it be an armor, power armor, or weapon workbench, go to an existing legendary item or a non-legendary item that you want to turn into one. And now if you have the right things, you'll see the option to turn it into a 1-star, 2-star, or 3-star. And to be clear on this one, to do this, you have to have the appropriate star core. So if I want to craft a 3-star weapon, I must have a 3-star legendary core. We'll go over how you actually get those in a moment. And then from there, it's simple. Whatever you select, whether it be 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, you'll get a new legendary item being of that specific item you are editing with just new random legendary effects. And actually, that's it. That's the entire system right there. So you might be confused, like, okay, what happened to like re-rolling or downgrading? How does that come into play? So when Bethesda says you can re-roll legendaries, basically what they mean is, let's say you have a 3-star legendary item. You can technically click on that to craft a 3-star legendary, and it'll just give you 3 totally different stars, but it costs the exact same amount as if you do it on a non-legendary item. So re-rolling an existing legendary versus crafting a new legendary has the exact same cost associated with it. In a similar vein, if you want to downgrade a legendary item, like let's say you have a 3-star legendary and you want to turn it into a 2-star, it's the exact same situation. It is the same as crafting a new 2-star legendary, except you are going to lose your 3-star in the process. A lot of people thought there'd be some way to upgrade legendaries, like let's say you had a legendary that was a 2-star, you liked what both of the legendary effects were, and you wanted a third one that you get a random option of, but there's no way to actually preserve stars in the system. If you are upgrading a 2-star to a 3-star, you're just getting 3 new random legendary attributes. And really, it just never makes sense to re-roll or upgrade or downgrade a legendary item. Like, it is just a waste of resources. As we'll talk about in a minute, there are hard limits on how many times you can do this, because there are daily limits on the resources required for this crafting. There aren't daily limits on just crafting a new item. So let's say you have this melee item you love and you want to get a 3-star legendary version of it using this system. You could take the 2-star version you already have and just delete it, basically re-rolling all 3 stars. So then you will lose a 2-star and craft a new 3-star. Or alternatively, you can just craft a non-legendary version of that item and then craft a new 3-star legendary, and it'll cost the exact same amount, except you won't lose the 2-star in the process. It's kind of hard to explain or put this all into words, but hopefully in the background it becomes very clear why this is kind of a weird or not the most ideal system. But of course, where this system becomes immensely powerful is if you want one specific type of item upgraded. Like let's say it's the new rocket launcher added in with Steel Dawn. If you want a legendary variant of this in current Fallout 76 before the legendary crafting update, you kind of just gotta hope for the best. There's no direct way to craft one of these into a legendary. With this update, you do have that direct way of crafting it into a legendary. And honestly, I think Bethesda just worded this poorly, because although yes, you can technically reroll your existing legendary attributes or even upgrade or downgrade the star rating, it never really makes sense to, because it's always going to be cheaper to actually just craft a new regular non-legendary item and then upgrade that to a legendary. The real feature here is taking a non-legendary item and upgrading it to a legendary, and you could choose how many stars it has. And for certain items, again, this is super valuable. Even just in terms of armor types, like if you use some of the older armors, if you want a heavy variant of it, which will have the best stats to be legendary, this is a great system to actually help you get that. So the whole lack of actual proper upgrading, downgrading, or re-rolling was one half of why people are frustrated with this. The other half of the frustration comes with how expensive it is to craft these, or really the fact that it kind of adds in an additional grind into Fallout 76 in a way. And before we get into this, I do want to highlight that this is obviously very subject to change. These are just numbers that Bethesda can quite easily tweak and make this cheaper or more expensive. And with how much backlash it's getting right now, I have a feeling this will be tweaked at least somewhat. They've done this in the past on the public test server with things like legendary perks, so I have a feeling this will be tweaked in the future also. But at least how it exists right now, right at the PTS release. As I mentioned before, you need legendary cores to actually craft a legendary item. How do you get those? Basically from events. From a public event, so those typical ones that pop up around the map. To get a 3-star core to craft a 3-star legendary, there is a 1% drop chance, a 2.7% drop chance for a 2-star core, and a 6.3% chance at a 1-star core. From boss fights, you actually are guaranteed to get a core of some kind. So this being Encrypted, the Queen fight, the Colossus fight, and Project Paradise if you keep all 3 creatures alive. But you have to keep all 3 creatures alive to get the guaranteed core. For this, the odds are actually not horrible. 40% for a 3-star core, 42% for a 2-star core, and 18% for a 1-star core. And the last variation that has even better odds than regular events with Meat Week and Fosnot, you have a slightly better chance at getting a 3-star core with 5%, a 10% chance at a 2-star core, and a 10% chance at a 1-star core. So with those limited time events, you'll be getting some more cores overall. But to me, honestly, that's not even the real bottleneck here, as the real bottleneck are some of the artificial limits placed on script for Fallout 76. As I mentioned before, the legendary cores are only one half of this crafting. The other half come from legendary modules. So in Fallout 76, you can buy legendary modules from the legendary purveyor at a cost of 50 script each. By default in Fallout 76, if you go to one of these deposit machines where you can scrap legendary items, you can get up to 150 script from one of these, which will give you 3 legendary modules. The problem being, if you want to craft, let's say, a 3-star weapon, it's actually going to take 4 legendary modules. And this is the actual breakdown for this, for power armor, and weapons. Weapons and power armor being the most expensive. Regular armor you technically could do within that 150 script. So if, let's say, once per day you wanted to craft or have a roll at a 3-star weapon or piece of power armor, you'll need the equivalent of 200 script. What that means is every single day, if you want to do this, what you'll have to do is, in addition to depositing legendary items in this, you're going to have to do daily quests and daily ops, as you also happen to get legendary script from completing those daily quests that were introduced with Wastelanders, and from daily ops, which were introduced shortly thereafter, although daily ops is going to be a little bit more tedious and take longer. But a lot of people are super frustrated about this because in the current system, the way this will all tie together is you're going to kind of have a longer grind. They are adding daily quests to that grind if you want 1 roll per day. And of course, this is not to mention at the current values, that is literally just 1 roll per day at a 3-star weapon, which is probably going to be the most popular. So now on the PTS right now, you can technically deposit up to 300 script per day, which would equate to 6 cores per day, which would make this whole thing quite a bit easier. There's still definitely critiques of it, but a lot of times Bethesda does just do this in the PTS for testing purposes, and it's not totally clear if this is a change that is going to stick. They've done this in the past and it reverts as soon as the patch goes live on public servers. It's okay, hopefully that explanation makes sense, but the reason this now becomes somewhat controversial or frustrating for people, let's go back to that hypothetical. Let's say you got this cool new rocket launcher from Steel Dawn, the Brotherhood rocket launcher, and you want to turn it into your ideal legendary. legendary, your god roll, and you want to use this legendary crafting system to get that. Well, by default, if you're crafting a 3-star legendary, there is a 1 in 2600 chance to get your 3 ideal stars. Considering on average you could do this once per day with the current system, barring any changes in the future, that'll mean it'll literally take you potentially years to get the 3 stars you want exactly from this. You'll probably have better luck just grinding Fallout 76 typically. And of course, this is another system that to maximize, you basically have to log in every day to hit that script limit, because I'm sure the vast majority of people are going to be wanting 3-star legendaries at the top tier of the economy at the end game, which I think this is largely designed as an end game system. That's what's going to sell for big money, a god roll with the right 3 stars. And just another thing that's going to force you to log in every day to properly participate in, or you're just not going to be participating all that often. One super great change that has been suggested numerous times is making that script limit weekly. So let's say you actually work or you can't log in and play Fallout 76 every single day. Maybe you could just play on Saturday and get the full extent, do a couple of crafts then, deposit a bunch of legendaries, and still does have artificial and hard limits on it, but it would be a lot better. Or even just making that daily limit a bit higher. So overall, to summarize with legendary crafting, in its current rendition, it is definitely an upgrade in that you can target one specific item. If you just love a certain design of an item, or if you're just having a hard time getting a god roll on your favorite thing, this should hypothetically make it easier. It is just going to be another thing that you have to log in every single day to continue trying at, as it without a doubt seems like you will very quickly have a ton of legendary cores and not nearly enough legendary modules / script to actually keep up with that demand. Now I feel quite confident this will get changed at some point in the future just based on the level of backlash that is around this. I don't think anyone is really happy with how the system exists right now community wise, and I imagine Bethesda will listen to that. Now how far it'll get changed, how much these levels or amounts will be modified is still up in the air. We have no idea. But we got 2 months, so I have my fingers crossed that we do see a nice or at least somewhat decent change around this. But then we get into legendary power armor, which is another one that a lot of people think needs to be changed or turned down because it is extremely good right now. So in game, legendary power armor isn't really anything special. I thought it'd be integrated through the Brotherhood of Steel questline since they're kind of known for wearing power armor, but in reality it is just now added to the leveled list and of course implemented with the legendary crafting system, so you'll just get enemies dropping it or you can craft legendary power armor for yourself. And really from there, it's pretty much the exact same as regular armor, including all of the original benefits of power armor. Although there are 4 specific attributes that cannot be applied to legendary power armor. The most notable probably being auto revive, that being the chance to revive yourself using a stim pack automatically, and improved sneaking, that being harder to detect while sneaking. But many of the other very powerful legendary attributes like sentinels, vanguards, unyielding do actually apply here. So in Fallout 76 right now, power armor and regular armor have an interesting balance in that power armor does provide a base 42 damage reduction. So incoming damage is just flat reduced by 42%, making power armor fairly viable in addition to just the base stats, base resistances being a bit higher. But conversely, legendary armor has the benefit of having all of these various legendary effects that are oftentimes more valuable. But right now on the public test server, the way it works is legendary power armor just has both of them now. It keeps that 42% damage reduction if you do have a full set, and in addition gets all of the legendary effects, so it can be ridiculously OP. It's kind of hard to test all of these various combinations because there's no way to manually assign them even on the public test server for testing. You still have to find these things naturally or craft them using legendary cores. But basically in this current implementation, legendary power armor is just better. The meta will easily and very quickly shift to power armor because you're basically a walking god. If you get a really good set of this, you can make it so you more or less have like 90% reduced damage from attacks from certain enemies. Even just in game right now, if you randomly craft 5 pieces of 3-star legendary power armor, you're going to be doing way better than the vast majority of even some of the meta builds on regular armor. This stuff is ridiculously powerful, and again, it is basically always going to be better than regular armor here. Now, whether or not this will be tweaked further in the future, I have no idea. It was honestly one of the laziest implementations of this. Like I even said in some of my videos before this update, if they just add all of the legendary effects, and okay, technically 4 weren't added, but functionally the vast majority of legendary effects, especially the very good ones, are available, power armor will just be the definitive weapon of choice. Like in my videos, if this isn't changed, you'll basically always just see me wearing power armor now because it's better and like a lot better. Although it does also potentially pose an issue, and I can see Bethesda nerfing this because, again, if you get a good set, you can make it so you are more or less a walking tank. You are almost unkillable against some enemies, and even without the best set in the world, you can make it so with just the occasional tapping of the H key to apply a stim pack, you are pretty much a god. One of the unforeseen and kind of interesting aspects of this that will frustrate some players is how much these script for. So if you want to deposit a 3-star piece of legendary power armor for script, it takes 80 script, which is actually really high, double what a 3-star armor or weapon would be. This too may get changed, but that technically means you could only actually script 1 3-star piece per day because the limit right now is 150. And considering how heavy some of these power armors are, I think a lot of people will just end up dropping them rather than saving them to script because you will quickly run out of stash space. Now, this isn't inherently a bad thing. I think a lot of people, including myself, have way too many legendary items that need to be script, and it's definitely the bottleneck being script, but this will push it more so in one direction. You'll probably be seeing a lot more dropped legendary power armor because of the weight and script amount. But then we get into what for me is by far the most disappointing aspect of this update overall, and that is in some of the newly added and reworked legendary attributes for Fallout 76. When Bethesda mentioned during their recent AMA that they were going to be taking a look at legendary mods, I got super excited. Legendary weapons and armors are quite literally a cornerstone of this game. Even before you're level 50, finding a good one is quite a fundamental aspect of enjoying this game and actually just being relevant damage-wise. And despite that, in the now 2.5 years since this game's release, there hasn't been much in the way of balance changes overall here. Things have largely stayed pretty similar, outside of one of the changes around the 2-shot explosive meta they did at one point early on. So when they revealed that they're going to be not only adding new legendary effects, but also reworking some of the old ones, I got super excited. Except it's honestly not that exciting and not going to really lead to a massive change in the meta. So first, to go over what exactly was added. For weapons, we got a couple of new 1-star legendary attributes. Aristocrat damage increases as caps increase to a maximum of plus 50% damage at 29,000 caps. Juggernauts, where damage increases as health increases to a maximum of plus 25% damage at 95% health or above. Heavyweight, it's something coming, but still a work in progress, so we don't know exactly what it is. Gormans, damage increases as you fill your hunger and thirst meters. Maximum of plus 24% damage. And for all of those, when they say a maximum, it is scaling, so you'll get a lower benefit as those meters do go down or as you have less caps or less health. For some of the new 2-star effects, we do have Last Shot. The final round in a magazine has a 25% chance to deal twice as much damage. Unfortunately, this does not apply to single-shot weapons like black powder rifles, but that would have actually been kind of cool and made those particularly powerful. Steady, plus 25% damage while standing still. Inertial, replenish 15 action points with each kill. Then some effects that could apply on a 3rd-star. Ghosts, attacks that hit enemies each have a 10% chance to generate a stealth field. When it comes to armor, there's quite a bit in the way of new effects that can be pretty powerful. These applying to both legendary power armor and legendary armor. Aristocrats, energy and damage resistance increase as caps increases, so a maximum of plus 20 for each resistance at 29,000 caps, and on power armor a maximum of plus 35 for each resistance at 29,000 caps. Heavyweight, which is still a work in progress, but they do list how heavyweight on power armor will make it so if you are carrying 350 pounds on your character, you'll get plus 35 for each resistance. Overeaters increase damage reduction to up to 6% as you fill your hunger and thirst meters. That's a notable one, as that is actually one of the very powerful ones. For some of the effects that can spawn as a 2-star on armor, Gluttons, hunger and thirst grow 10% slower. It'll stack up to 50%. The effects Fireproof and Warming, which apply plus 25 fire resistance and 25 cryo resistance respectively. Hardy, where you receive 10% less damage from explosions. And then some of the new 3-star effects, Doctor, Stimpaks, Radaway, and Radix are 5% more effective. And then Burning, Electrified, Frozen, and Toxic, which each give a 5% chance to deal some type of respective damage to melee attackers. And then lastly, Dissipating, slowly regenerate radiation damage when out of combat. So there's definitely some interesting ones out of all of those, in particular on the armor side, that I do want to highlight. But before we do that, let's talk about the reworked legendary effects, as these two can have the potential to now be relevant when they weren't previously. For weapons, we see how Assassins got its damage increased. Now it does plus 50% damage to humans instead of the 10% previously. Berserkers got a bit of a rework, this making it so the lower your damage resistance, the higher your added damage, for a maximum of plus 50% damage at 0 damage resistance. resistance. If your damage resistance was too high, this used to actually reduce your damage overall. That aspect of it has been removed entirely, and they actually nerfed this slightly. So the damage buff when your damage resistance is between 1 and 60 has been slightly reduced, but you can still get up to a maximum of plus 50% if you get to the full 0 damage resistance. We then saw a buff on basically all of the enemy specific legendary effects, so like how Zealots gives you bonus damage versus Scorched, then Troubleshooters bonus damage versus Robots. Each of these used to give you plus 30% damage. They will now give you plus 50% damage against their respective enemy types. Mutants got a pretty nice buff where more or less it used to just give you a flat plus 10% damage overall if you were mutated. Now instead it'll give you plus 5% damage per mutation you have for up to a maximum of plus 25% damage overall at 5 mutations. Nocturnal definitely got a big buff. It used to give you a debuff during the day so you deal less damage, but at nighttime you would deal more damage. That debuff during the day has just been removed outright, and at nighttime you'll get increasing damage numbers. So depending on the time you'll get plus 35%, 50%, or 60% bonus damage. For suppressors, which will apply damage reduction to incoming attacks from enemies, this too got a bit of a buff, not a huge one though. Instead of it being 20% damage reduction for 3 seconds, it's now 25% for 5 seconds. And then for some of the 2 stars out there, for bashers, we got increased bashing damage from 40% to 50%, so that literally being when you hit an enemy with the butt of your gun. Hitman's got an increased damage while aiming from 10% to 25%, which is actually quite substantial. Enhanced VATS increase the VATS hit chance from plus 33% to plus 50%. And then finally, 2 of the armor changes. Assassins now reduce damage taken by all humans by 15%, and Nocturnal remove the daytime debuff again, and damage and energy resistance now increased by 10% per piece of Nocturnal armor during nighttime. So that was a lot, and one of the big things that I think stands out to me with these changes overall, before we dive into some of the more powerful ones that were added or overhauled, is it just doesn't really affect the meta that much. And even further, there's still no addressing some of those very powerful legacy weapons. Like in a bunch of my videos, you see me using this flamer. It's an explosive flamer with the primary effect being suppressor, so technically it actually got a buff during this update. The reason this is so powerful is because of an interaction that's not really intended to work in the way it does. It's kind of broken, more or less. And if you play Fallout 76 for long enough, you'll definitely see people using these legacies, and they are just ridiculously powerful at points. This seemed like the big opportunity to actually address that, get some semblance of balance back into the game, but they seem to just be ignoring it for one reason or another. And although on one hand, I'm particularly happy that they're not nerfing any of the super meta builds, Bloodied, Junkied, and Anti-Armor are definitely some of the most popular, but overall for me, I was hoping Bethesda would add in some better alternatives. Something you see a lot of games do is overtune things, then kind of follow it up with a few updates to get things more in line. So I was really hoping Bethesda would add in a couple of especially weapon legendary effects that you would be like, oh wow, that's actually super powerful. I definitely want to try that out immediately, and with a good build could definitely replace whatever you're predominantly using. And although several of these new legendary effects are definitely interesting, in particular Aristocrats is potentially kind of powerful, mainly because there's not really a downside. A lot of players in Fallout 76 can easily have 29,000 caps, and just getting a free plus 50% damage is good. But if you're already using something like Junkies or Bloodied, are you going to shift around your entire build for this? That's still kind of up in the air. And for some of the new ones, it really does kind of feel like they're just dead on arrival. Like Juggernauts, damage increases as health increases to a maximum of 25% damage. This could have been really good, but I feel like it's not going to be used all that often because even just look at the one above it. Aristocrats gives you plus 50% damage. Or even Gormans, where it's 24% damage for having a full hunger and thirst meter. Neither of those on the weapon side are particularly enticing. I feel like if they did like 60% damage, yeah, it might be kind of overpowered, but Bethesda could tweak that overall. You could see how the meta slightly shifts around it. I think on the armor side, a lot of these new effects are actually going to be quite a bit more powerful. It's hard to test a lot of this stuff because on the public test server right now, it's not like you could just create a weapon with these effects or some of the different combinations that could be good. You still have to rely on the same RNG or legendary crafting mechanics that you would have to on a live server. Overeaters seems like it is going to be a huge one, increasing damage reduction up to 6% as you fill your hunger and thirst meters is massive, up to 30% reduced damage. Power armor gives you 42%, and you could get overeaters on power armor. That's going to be very little damage being done to you, and with a couple of other effects or perks, you can very quickly just become invincible, like unkillable with this one. With some of the armor, I think in particular particular, some of these secondary 2-star effects will actually be kind of handy to have in the background after that primary effect. Like Overeater's Gluttons could be a super powerful build, Gluttons making it so your hunger and thirst grow slower, up to 50% slower, and even Fireproof and Warming. I don't know if these will be sought after in a heavy degree, but having those as a secondary effect is never going to be a bad thing. And overall, I think honestly where I stand on this one right now is some of these newly added legendary effects aren't even that bad. I actually kind of liked several of them, and they do add in an interesting new dynamic to the game. But to me, the rebalance really feels like it falls short. Some people are definitely going to like the new Nocturnals, I don't, and I feel like the rebalance just could have done way more, making some of those niche pick cases a lot more valuable. Like if I really do want to rep a Mutant Slayer weapon, let me just deal ridiculous damage to mutants, because the vast majority of time, a lot of people are already over damaging mutants with their existing build, taking them out in 1 to 2 shots, and that being a build that applies damage to everything. So taking something that is only beneficial against a mutant and it only giving you plus 50% damage is just not that lucrative. So overall with these, I think it's one of those aspects of the game that definitely needs a lot more testing. It's kind of hard to gauge all of this just by reading these stats on the page. You have to consider all of the possible combinations. There's some interesting ones in there, again, I think mostly with armor, and in particular legendary power armor is ridiculously overpowered on release, but for me, I just was hoping for a lot more as far as these balance changes go, and again, some clear indications of alternate weapons to take, or even just make pistols viable for once. That would be cool. Although even still, that's actually not everything, as there are several data mines, things in the files on the public test server that give us a bit of a look as to what's to come next for the game. A new weapon was found, not currently live or accessible in the PTS overall, but the Pepper Shaker is seemingly going to be some kind of shotgun. It almost looks like a Gatling shotgun, which, okay, that would be an awesome new weapon to get, but it's still early on. It's still very much so a work in progress. It currently has some mods for being a base shotgun, for being laser or plasma. It's not even clear how exactly you can even unlock this weapon thus far, but it definitely has a cool design, and I think having some kind of hybrid Gatling shotgun, kind of a mix between a heavy weapon and a shotgun, could be ridiculously cool, and if it benefits from both perk cards, of course, it would be ridiculously overpowered. There's going to be a new limited time Brotherhood of Steel themed event in the game, this not being an actual in-game event, but rather something you do as a community collectively. Basically, as a community, we have to wear this backpack, and then while wearing the backpack, complete events in the Forest, Toxic Valley, Savage Divide, or Ash Heap, or capture workshops anywhere. And for each week of this, there's a couple of different rewards, a Pip-Boy skin, a new player icon, several new flags that you can unlock, and if you complete all of the challenges, you get awarded with this new helmet. On the PTS right now, there is a totally new location that will seemingly be used for a future actual event, like an event you do in game. This is called the Metal Dome, and it's currently a work in progress, but there is some dialogue to be data mined. And basically, it seems like there's this spin-off of the Blood Eagles known as the Rust Eagles that are creating robots. And in the Metal Dome, these Rust Eagles are holding matches between their robots and people, and thus we'll be fighting off waves of robots during this. We are here effectively collecting intel about this new faction and their robots for the Brotherhood of Steel. You report back to Scribe Valdez at the end. Although that is largely it. Bethesda has definitely wised up over the past couple of months, realizing people have been data mining stuff, and thus now most of that data mineable content is not in this build of the game. Although there's a ton of other stuff in this build of the game as far as actual features you can use, so that's not super shocking. But as far as things far out like the Alien DLC or even private server stuff, it doesn't seem like there's much to be found in the files, or at least nobody's found it yet. With that said, hopefully you guys found this very long video very informative, kind of a comprehensive look at what this update is adding. To me, it's still going to be one of the biggest and most interesting updates. It'll be interesting to see what they actually change around the legendary crafting and power armor, etc. If they only do minor changes, legendary crafting I think is going to be one of those things that's kind of cool to have in the background, but not many people will necessarily love using that system all the time. In its current iteration, it's not really the game changer some people were hoping it would be. Conversely, power armor is going to be ridiculously overpowered with those legendary variants, and again, pretty much be a must take. I don't know if they're going to full on nerf that into the ground, but I kind of doubt it unless they go the whole rework approach and come back with something totally different. But if nothing else, you definitely have the complete Brotherhood of Steel story, which is a good few hours of new content, and with all of these new systems underpinning it in the past couple of updates, adding in a lot of other cool quality of life stuff, I think it'll be a point for a lot of players to return. And I think Bethesda will advertise that at E3. With that said, as always again, I thank you for watching. I hope you found this very long video informative, but until next time, I hope to see you all later.